Nebenstimmen, a podcast by Ensemble Modern. Nebenstimmen brings you conversations on music, art and life between ensemble members and conversation partners chosen by them. Find out what the musicians are working on at the moment and what their personal thoughts are.
Welcome to Nebenstimmen, the Ensemble Modern podcast. I'm Paul Cannon, the double bassist of the Ensemble Modern, and I'm joined today by Rebecca Saunders. Rebecca, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
Of course. So this is just kind of an informal chat, and it's maybe a chance to give our listeners a moment to hear just two musicians talking about music and whatever's on their mind. I definitely have some questions for you that I would love to hear your perspective on. I've always known you to be a very open and very interested person with quite a lot to say. But first, I just want a little bit of background. You're originally from London?
That's right.
And you came to Germany, I don't know when that was.
1991.
1991. I was 4
Were
years
you
old.
born?
I was born. I was 4. What exactly brought you to Germany?
Well, I finished my bachelor up in Scotland, and I managed to get a very generous scholarship after I got my bachelor, and which enabled me to go abroad for a year. And I decided I wanted to study composition, because up to that point I was basically primarily a violinist. Mm-hmm. And I listened to the music of all different people teaching in Europe, and I heard something in Wolfgang's music which just, Wolfgang Rihm's music, which opened my eyes, really. I was very conscious of having to conform to certain norms and expectations when writing music in Scotland, and really didn't feel free enough to be able to really begin to even think about what I wanted to do. And I heard this music and I just thought, okay, I'll just go there and see if he'll teach me. And I was very fortunate. He just said yes. And then I just got in a car with a friend and drove through France and found Germany and ended up in Karlsruhe. And it was really very spontaneous. And I said to myself, I'll just see how it goes. And if I can do it, I'll stay. And if I can't, I'll come home again and do a PhD in something.
But you must have been composing before that. You don't just show up at Wolfgang Riehm's house and ask for lessons, or?
I went to the Hochschule. I applied via the Hochschule, but back then the rules were less stringent about being able to speak German or not, and I didn't have to apply for a DAAD scholarship because I had the scholarship from Edinburgh, so I really was able just to go to Germany without having any language skills at all. Okay. And the rules were much less strict and conformed.
So you didn't speak any German when you came to Germany?
I could say, how do you get to the train station? Can I have a beer, please? And count to 20.
That's pretty good.
It's pretty good. Yeah. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. That means I can order 20 beers. But I was composing as a child. I composed also as a teenager. And then when I started doing my bachelor degree actually in Edinburgh, I kind of stopped composing. And then the third and the fourth year, because in Scotland you have a 4-year bachelor course, not a 3-year, and then you can really specialise. And then I really started getting back into composing again.
Was that kind of a scary decision to decide to become a composer? Because
I didn't decide anything. I just followed my gut in a way, and it wasn't scary at all. I literally put my violin away in its coffin, and I never played again. It was very, very strange. I had been a violinist all up till that time, and it was incredibly liberating because so much of that decision involved an extraordinary freedom that I'd never experienced before in my life, just to move abroad. And you've probably experienced this yourself. You were also very young when you came to Germany, and it's just actually suddenly to find yourself in a completely different culture. You have an opportunity to redefine what your priorities are, what you really want to do with yourself, and who you actually are. And it was really wonderful for the first couple of years when I couldn't speak the language so well, and I was outside of society, had no responsibilities. Back then, a master's didn't involve actually having to do any courses. I just wrote music and hang out with art students. It was an incredibly liberating time, and I wrote a lot of music. So any scary part of that decision was completely overridden by just a sense of complete liberation, and to finally just do that one thing, which is just to only write music. But it was, it wasn't a decision. It was just, I was just following my gut, I think. Really.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, composition. I think since I was quite young, that was something I was interested in. But I was always a little bit too scared to take that path. It always seemed like where I was coming from, if you could play the bass kind of okay, you would get some gigs, which is probably different for a violinist, perhaps.
No, it's not. I think we always used to go busking in the underground in London and do string quartets when I did my degree in Scotland. We used to play for Cayleys and for different occasions and stuff. We used to earn extra money through playing the violin. I didn't think about the money side of it. I was completely naive, thank God.
So you were in school in Karlsruhe with Wolfgang Rihm.
Yes.
And then at some point you must have finished.
Yes.
And you stepped out into a big wide world.
No, I got another scholarship to go back to Edinburgh to do a PhD.
Okay.
And it was a 3-year scholarship. They called it a Premier Scholarship, basically to entice people to come back to Europe, to come back to Scotland. So I settled down to do a PhD in composition there, because I've never had financial support from my parents or anything, and it was just like, okay, I finished this künstlerische Ausbildung, which is like equivalent to what nowadays is a master's. And what am I going to do now? And I was beginning to had a lot of opportunities in Germany, but then I kind of thought, okay, I've got to get some kind of support here. And then I went back to Scotland to start my PhD. And after about 6 or 7 months, I just started traveling, because you can't really go back. You can't go backwards. It's not something you can really do. So I went to New York for a number of weeks. I was in Brussels for a number of weeks, and I was traveling around sort of looking after people's apartments, and then someone offered me an apartment in Berlin to look after, and I spent a couple of years going back and forth between Edinburgh and Berlin.
Okay. I mean, was there kind of a point where you noticed you weren't a student anymore and you were just a composer full time and you were making it work, or was it kind of a bumpy road? Was it super smooth?
I think what was I'm really very fortunate that I kept getting sort of little prizes or little composition commissions where I could just about bridge the gap. I was fortunate that I had this for the first 3 years with this Premier Scholarship, basically covering my rent, and meaning that I could be really, really flexible.
Okay.
So that really, really helped. But I don't think that the difference between being a student and being a composer, I never really thought about it. What was wonderful about being a composer in Europe was just like this official description of being a young composer till you're 40. I just thought that was brilliant. There was just years, there were decades ahead of me. And I found that really liberating. And I do worry sometimes about the younger generation who try, I feel almost forced to professionalize and make everything too glossy too soon. But then we made a lot of mistakes and took a lot of risks and were very, very messy at the edges for a long, long time.
Right.
And I really appreciate the fact that I was considered young till I was 40. That was really, really good. Because as a composer, you need years and years and years and years of just working your ass off.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think it's a shame to actually feel compelled to write your first opera at 25, unless you're a real opera composer. I mean, there are some fantastic young composers who can do that and want to do that, but not to be pushed and actually to take your time to really develop your own language.
So it sounds like you had a lot of financial support along the way in terms of small prizes or scholarships or grants, which I know from my own education was quite important, actually, to just have some financial backing.
I think if you don't have money from your family, without that, you have no chance. I wouldn't have had a chance because my family didn't give me anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then part of getting those prizes is also this kind of moral support.
Yes.
Do those kinds of things, getting prizes, you're a very well-awarded composer. Do those prizes mean a lot to you, or is it just kind of a nice thing that comes up, or is that something you really crave?
I crave. I wouldn't say it's something I crave,
Okay.
but it's not the word that comes out. No, of course, having that kind of recognition can really mean a lot to you. But, and when I was much younger, it really meant a lot to me because you just spend months just working on something, and you're in a relative kind of isolation for long periods of time. And I love to work with musicians one-to-one to explore sounds. I love to work with the same ensembles or the musicians again and again to really develop a creative working relationship. But there are long periods of time where you just work, Fleißarbeit, that
Right.
just has to happen. And it's very nice sometimes from outside, just when suddenly sort of something great like that comes in, you think, hey, I'm not alone here,
Right.
and that's really important. Of course, it's nice to be recognized for what you do. It's quite shocking sometimes. It was very shocking in 2019 with the Ernst von Siemens Prize. But it's it's also at the same time very, very important not to take oneself too seriously.
Yeah.
And just because you are awarded something doesn't mean you're necessarily any better than the next guy or the next
That's right.
woman, and just, I know I've been ridiculously fortunate,
But
Yeah.
it was well-deserved, come on.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who are well-deserved. No, I'm not playing like being over humble or anything. I just think it's really important not to take these things too seriously and to remember what really, really is important is for us to be working in a rehearsal, to be experimenting, have this extraordinary work that we do together, which is to get up in the morning and write music and try out sounds and do this weird project, and it's just makes me so happy. It's even better than drinking my first coffee in the morning, just to get up and think, my God, I can write music again. And that's really what it's all about.
It's never a drag for you to write?
No.
Wow. Never feels like work.
It is work. Yes, of
it's
course.
work.
Sometimes it's really exhausting, and it isn't easy. There are very difficult phases, of course, but I've only had 1.5 kind of crises. Really, I had one in 2001.
Crises like
I just couldn't write.
writer's block.
Yeah, I had one in 2001 where I kind of felt that I'd kind of run out. No, 2000, it was in 2000. It was like up to that point, up to those first kind of 8 or 9 years, it's as if I had been just writing out all the sounds in my head that had been there all my life. Like all those resonances, all those sounds, all those extraordinary experiences of playing in an orchestra, working with musicians, the sounds of my parents making music when I was little, everything. It was like I was just working through the sounds. And then one day I woke up and it was like, oh my God, I've got to stop thinking now,
Oh,
and that
so
was a really.
you just finished, and
It was
that
like,
was it.
yeah, and then it took a while for me to find a new way to approach writing.
Yeah, what got you out of that?
Patience,
Just patience.
writing a very bad piece,
Okay.
which was really important to break down several walls and get into a new space.
Okay.
Yeah, that was really important to have the guts to write a piece that I knew just wasn't going to work,
is-
but to force myself to think and to hear differently.
Is that a piece we can hear, or is that shelved away somewhere?
It's half shelved away somewhere.
Okay, I won't ask more.
It doesn't matter, it's fine. In fact, I think, whatever. And then the last time I couldn't write was actually very recently. That was the first time then in 30 years, I suppose, isn't it? No, not 30. In 20 years was in the second lockdown. I just couldn't write for 5 months. I just couldn't write anymore.
Okay.
But I had written a massive amount of music up to the piano concerto last year, and for many sort of personal reasons, I just had to stop. And then I started again.
I wanted to ask you for a little bit of a composition lesson.
Great.
So I dabble in composing from time to time, but
Right.
I'm not a composer. And I never had proper composition lessons, so I don't even know what a composition lesson looks like, actually. But I have been very lucky to spend most of my time in my working life hanging around very good composers. So I've been able to pick here and there different ideas and different thoughts. But I'm curious. You have a brand new student coming in. You've never worked with a student before, and you have 60 minutes alone with the student. What's the first thing you do?
It would depend on a lot of factors, to be honest. It would depend where they are, how far they've developed. I would definitely know if there was going to be a new student of mine. I would know what their history is, and I would know what they've written up to that point, and that kind of is important. It's very important to know how sensitive or how fragile that person is in regard to their music and their relationship with writing. So first of all, you have to think about it. Some people, you can break. Some people you should never break. Some people you have to encourage in a certain way. Other people actually are so hungry, they demand certain things. So people are very, very different.
What are some of the priorities you have for your students? Once they've left your studio, there should be certain skills.
I want to really, in a lesson, I want to imbue someone with so much hunger to write. So I want them to go out there charged and just write.
Okay.
That's super important for me, and it's very satisfying when that happens. It's quite tiring, but it's really, really good. I really think that's important, to find a way so that people, so that he or she can actually sense that impulse which sets something off. And that's often the question is, what is the impulse? Can they feel it and see it and sense it themselves? Or what drives that person to that first sound or that first note or that first conception or that first structural idea? If you were to walk in and you've got nothing, no bag, nothing in your hands, and I would say, is there something very particular that you want to talk about?
Yes.
That would be the first thing I would say.
So my first question is, I have a commission and a blank piece of paper. What do I do?
And you say, well, first of all, that question I cannot answer.
Yeah.
And the first thing is, well, what do you want to write? Or do you have an instrumentation? Do you have a duration? How much time do you have? And is there anything, and you can answer those questions, but is there anything that you feel, is there an impulse there which is driving you to write this piece? Do you have, is there a color? Is there an image? Is there a word? Is there a sound? Is there a fragment of something? Is there a state of energy? Is there a relationship to an earlier piece that is perhaps something that you would like to question? Is there an earlier piece, maybe an open window that you would like to jump through and see if there's a new space that you would like to investigate? There's all different ways of approaching it. It would depend very, very much also upon your body language and how you would approach that with me. If you say that to me, so what shall I do? I say, well, I can't tell you what to do.
Right.
So,
but I am asking about just a very basic process of composition. That I mean, of course, all of those questions you just asked are crucial. And if we're talking about me, I should have some ideas, at least about the instrumentation, and maybe one or two ideas about the scope. Maybe I'm trying to write a 4-minute short piece for double bass and flute.
Okay, that's cool. So we have a lot of information now.
Already.
Yeah.
But in terms of structure, I mean, it doesn't work for me to just get staff paper and start writing dots on the page.
It doesn't work for a lot of people.
I don't think like that. Yeah. And if I'm writing for solo bass, because that's my instrument, that's quite easy. I pick up a bass. Yeah. And I play around, and when I find something I like, I record it.
Well, the first thing with a duo like this, okay, we've got a duo of bass and flute. So the first thing I would say, well, what's the relationship between the two instruments? Is that one instrument? Is that a unified? Is that an Einheit? Or are those two separate instruments? Are they in dialogue? Do they share a sound palette of sounds? Are they very disparate, the way in which you're approaching those instruments? Do you have a sound in mind? Do you have a conceptual form in mind? What the relation, or whether that's a duo, do they sit next to each other? Are they standing on the other sides of the room? Is there any kind of spatial? There's all hundreds of questions I could ask you. But the first, usually I'd ask one or two questions and then something comes back and then you follow that. Yeah. But it's about me trying to initiate.
Right.
I'm not initiating that you think. What I'm trying to help you is to articulate maybe something which you probably haven't put into words yet before, or communicated even to yourself before. Maybe that's something to do with it. Not necessarily, though. It depends so much upon the individual. I think composition lesson is so subjective. It depends so much upon that person, not just what they bring in practical terms into the lesson, but actually how they are cognitively and emotionally, and how they actually deal with the relationship. It's very strange. It's very intimate, a one-to-one composition lesson in some ways.
Yeah.
Because someone coming in and saying, No,
I'm already noticing it. It feels a little more like a therapy session than I was expecting.
It doesn't necessarily have to be that, because that's you bringing that also into the situation,
Right.
Not everyone would necessarily interpret it like
No,
that.
I mean, and that's a bit of a difference in a creative sense than having an instrumental lesson, where the problem is quite clear, actually. Here's a piece I need to play, and it's hard. Can you help me?
Yeah.
And maybe it's a technical issue, or maybe it's just a different way of thinking about it musically. But at least the question itself is already clear.
Yeah, because you have the piece, you've started practicing, and you know where the problems are. So you're actually starting in a very, very different point in the process. And if you come in with an empty piece of paper and say, help, yeah, that's very different. I mean, at the end of the day, nobody can tell you to write, and nobody can tell you how to write or what to write. I think to a certain extent, but it's not the case for all people. But for some people, it's very much actually trying to help people to formulate ways of dealing with a process of filtering and of making decisions. Writing music is about making decisions. What do I leave out? What do I want to have? It's
Right.
It's decision making.
So, I mean, if let's say we skip a few steps here, and my blank piece of paper now has a bunch of dots on it.
Okay.
And, it's a draft. At what point do you know that it's finished?
You will know when it's finished. I will not know when it's finished. You define.
But when you're writing your pieces,
yes,
you know when it's finished.
Yes.
How do you know that?
Because it's done.
But you have done revisions before.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
But often after a premiere, I always have to revise the score. It's usually just more a question of the length of a fermata, taking out a comma, adding a comma.
Okay.
You know
like
this
very
from
fine details.
Very fine
which
details.
Which you're famous for.
Yes, which I am, unfortunately. But little things like that. Sometimes it might be a matter of I remember for my cello solo Solitude with Séverine Ballon, and I think I took out 5 bars. It made a massive difference. The whole form just suddenly pulled together, and it was just a matter of trying to make sure that the actual formal structure was exactly how it should be, that the balance was just right. And sometimes that's a kind of a big change. But I very rarely actually rewrite a piece. I did that actually at the beginning of this year, trying to get back into composing in January. I rewrote a trio called That Time for trio canto. And I spent 6 weeks rewriting the piece completely from the beginning to the end. And I never do that, but it was a really, really interesting exercise.
But when you talk about a formal structure, does that mean you actually start off with a sort of roadmap for the piece? Or you wing it?
I wing it.
Okay.
But I don't wing it, obviously. I don't wing it, but yeah. It's no. I don't have a formal script. I don't know what it's going to be until I finished it.
Okay.
In fact, I often don't know what it is until I have a little bit of time afterwards to have some distance to the thing. I need time to actually remove myself from it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's helped me the most writing is just finding unique limitations. And because having a blank piece of paper means anything in the universe could be on that page. And it's not so much about putting anything there, it's about removing everything that's unnecessary.
A very interesting, a very nice way of trying to deal with that problem is actually you've got your blank piece of paper, which on the one hand is incredibly satisfying because it's saturated and it's perfect, you know? Saturated with silence, saturated with nothingness, a wonderful void, and it's absolutely perfect. And you, in a way, it's gathering the courage just to mess that up, to put one dot on that page, just one dot on that page. As soon as you've done that, then the process has begun. And that first dot is often terrifying and very, very scary to know, do I still wait? Do I do it now? Do I begin now? But that's the most important moment is the second dot, because then you have your first relationship, your first point of reference. And that's really, really important. That's really, really wonderful. And then you have your third dot, and you've already got a myriad of relationships. And to think of it that way is really, really nice. So you actually make that first gesture, and then the relationships start actually building up. That's really important.
Interesting. Okay, so the shape of the piece isn't clear until at least 3 notes have been played.
Yes, and that might be enough. I mean, for me, though, very often, I would not say always, but very often, it's like a fragment of sound is the reason for writing the piece, because I just think it's just so brilliant, and I'm so obsessed by it. I just want to explore it and push it to its limits and turn it on its head and turn it inside out and zoom in and zoom out and frame it, recontextualize it, and just play around with this one thing. And that is often what the piece is about, is discovering the sonic, acoustic, emotional, I don't know what potential of that thing. And that means that the structure is almost embedded in the fragment of the sound, and it's a matter of actually opening up the molecules of the sound. I don't know how to describe it.
Right.
And so the nature of the sound defines then, in a way, what could happen to the structure of the piece.
So we probably should talk a little bit about our current project with you. So the title of this project is Hauch, right? This is building upon your piece for solo viola.
Yes.
And adding a collage of different solo pieces. You've told me before that you've worked in collage styles before with your own music, taking different solo pieces and kind of layering them on top of each other in a structured way. And I know you've worked with dance before. We've even had a dance project together not so long ago with Emmanuel Gott. I'm curious what in this project is maybe new or novel, if anything, and what's kind of building upon previous work?
Okay, well, I think there's a lot that's very new this time. In my previous sort of spatial collages, which are basically musical and spatial polyphony, pretty much I've created the modules from scratch. Like in Yes, I have 28 modules. Each one was new, written and then collaged over like 82 minutes or something. Or in Stasis, I think there was 23 modules or something, and that's like 15 minutes long or something. This time, what was important for me is to actually take already completed solos and duos that are completely finished, not already been written, and to create a collage out of that with modules of dance. Something that totally fascinates me about the solo genre is the dramatic potential of the soloist with his or her instrument, this relationship between the soloist and his instrument. Like if we take your solo Fury for double bass, it's an extremely physical piece. It's dance in itself, and interestingly enough, in the project as it's developing now, your solo is without dance.
Yeah.
Because it's so hypnotic to watch you play it. The piece is so physical, the way it's played, and also in what it sounds. So that the relationship between the performer and his instrument, this physical relationship, how the gesture defines the sound which we then hear, the dialogue between the performer and his instrument or her instrument, between the music and the audience. I wanted to emphasize that by actually bringing in dance modules, so that element of physicality in the performance situation is really in the foreground. so that we then see you in a different way. When you play that solo within a traditional solo portrait concert, it's very, very different from when the solos and the duos are collaged against and with each other and are juxtaposed with dance modules. Then we have a different sense of physicality and a different sense of theatre, despite the fact that there's no theme, there's no actual official drama going on.
No, that's true. I mean, the presentation, of course, is very different from a traditional concert.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's very nice lighting design. So we tried out with the lighting today for the first time. I don't know when this podcast is coming out, but we're in the middle of rehearsals now. So today was sort of the first try with all the lighting and the staging, and I just had this moment in the middle of the rehearsal, like, okay, I am in the middle of the Rebecca Saunders universe right now, and it's a very different perspective being on the stage.
Yeah.
It almost felt like I was inside your head. It was a scary place to be, Rebecca.
It's not. Yeah, I think it's probably scary to be, she says, putting her watch on and taking her coat. No, it's probably a very scary place to be for a lot of people very often, surely. You know, I mean, every one of us has inner monologues, our inner dramas, our inner voices. That's human. That's normal.
No, but it's very powerful. And I mean, you have such a lovely way of working with sound and with dissonance, which is quite far away from someone like Wolfgang Rihm, who loves to just bash you over the head with it. And it's also very fun to play.
Yeah, of course.
But it's a completely different thing.
Yeah.
But this is much more of an atmosphere situation. Very interesting to see how it's developing.
Yeah, I feel we just turned the corner today. It was interesting.
I think it was the lighting.
It was yes, the lighting changed things, although it was really interesting not to be able to see the dancers sometimes because it's all like totally fresh with the lighting and he's still experimenting.
Right.
But I love what he's beginning to build there, and now that he's actually really active now in the rehearsal situation, it's great. And he Marek couldn't really become more proactive until we had established the collage and the timeline. Yeah. So, I mean, we were all just waiting for each other, weren't we? But I thought the most important moment today was actually to do a dry walkthrough of a large proportion of 30 minutes of the piece. Just this walkthrough where suddenly I noticed that all the individual players, because we have to point out it's solos and it's just basically solos and one duo in the piece, is it's just suddenly everyone seemed to realize what the other people are doing. Suddenly it wasn't just a series of solos, it was actually a group of musicians doing things together. It suddenly changed the whole atmosphere. I thought it was a very interesting moment.
But I was also surprised at how well it works to kind of layer your pieces on top of each other. That maybe it adds a kind of commentary to it, but not really. I mean, the content of Fury, for example, doesn't change.
No.
I mean, it's still the piece. You just hear bits and pieces of some of the other solos fading in and out, and it gives it maybe another perspective. But I'm not playing the piece differently.
No, of course not. Which is the big test for you, because you know Fury so much better than the other players know their solos. Because you've performed that a number
Megumi
of times.
memorized her piece. I
but
didn't
it was
manage.
new though. It was new. Yeah, she's extraordinary. When I wrote it for her in spring, she says, "I'll learn it by summer."
She's crazy.
She's crazy. I mean, that is so impressive.
I tried, but it's too much.
I think Fury is very different from that piece though, because from Hauch though, because it is so choleric and so full of energy.
Well, and it's very similar to Fury 2, which I've played now, I think, more than 30 times.
Well, that is really horrible when I make a slight difference.
And it's still messing me up, actually. Just noticing, like, oh, that's now an A quarter flat and not an A flat. And, I don't have time to think about it, but it would make it very difficult to memorize it in my case, because I know Fury 2 so well, and Fury, or nobody calls it Fury 1, it's just Fury. Fury 1 is quite similar, and there's whole passages which are verbatim, the same material, but then there's just one more bar, which I've never seen before. And keeping those straight would scare me quite a lot. I think in this context, it's a little bit less scary because it's solo. And if I would make a mistake, I'm the only one who would really know. Maybe you would know. But I also have to play the concerto, Fury 2, from time to time. And we have some performances coming up quite soon.
Yeah, soon. No? It's interesting because Fury I wrote well before Fury 2, so to speak. I wrote that I can't remember, 2005 or something. Is that right? Does it say
that sounds right.
Yeah, 2005. But I always wanted that to be a concerto. I always wanted it to do that. And then when I had the opportunity in 2009 to write a concerto for the Staatskapelle. I was like composer in residence, and I had to do all these different kinds of projects, and I had to write a ridiculous amount of music in one season. It was silly, you know. I mean, I'm not a fast writer. And then I saw that as the opportunity, because I wanted to write a concerto, because I wanted to use to employ one of the musicians from the orchestra together with an ensemble, because it really is a much nicer way of developing a relationship with an orchestra, is to have soloists out of the orchestra and actually begin to, because it wasn't easy at the beginning to work with them. It was for them a very, very new idea to be working with contemporary music, let alone a young woman, you know. We did get to the point actually, and then basically I was so fortunate that the solo double bass actually agreed for me to write for him. And he'd never done a project like this before, and he really went for it. Cool. He has such an extraordinary sound, a massive double bass. And that was really, really fun. So it was just about the Fury 2 is just literally the resonances of the double bass actually given their own kind of kinetic energy.
It's a very well-written piece, and it's something I enjoy playing quite a lot. It's also one of the rare double bass concertos which, from an orchestration point of view, makes perfect sense. There's a lot of bass concertos out there, which, of course, nobody listens to except bass players.
Oh, dear.
But very often they have this orchestration problem that you have this huge orchestra and a double bass, which, despite its size, is not a particularly loud instrument.
Which is the wonderful thing about this instrument. It's this massive, beautiful object, and it's so quiet.
We try our best.
I know.
But, you know, without amplification, these pieces usually don't work. You had a very clever workaround, which was just, how big does the orchestra need to be? It's, 7 players? 8 musicians?
I think it's 6 players in addition to you. Yeah, I think it's 7 players. I'm not
7 total.
Yeah.
And we split the percussion part.
Exactly, which was really important for the dance production, actually, wasn't it? But I think I love that, to take a small ensemble and to try and make it sound big by having the piano resonances and the percussion resonances and the accordion with its massive range and its massive dynamic range too. I've just chose instruments which are extremely flexible, and it's possible then to have an extremely wide ambitus.
And I promised some bass players that I would ask this question.
4th string.
Yeah, will it ever be possible to have a version of this piece for either a 4-string bass or a 4-string bass with a C extension? My apologies to the non-bass players in the audience.
Well, to be honest, Paul, I mean, this is a question really I should ask you or other bass players who I've worked with from other ensembles or other soloists, because people keep asking me this, and I was even asked this last week in Lucerne, or the week before in Lucerne. I don't really know that it is possible, because it's about actually double stops in a very, very, very low register. And I can't really imagine that the piece could withstand that. But that is actually something I would love to try out, because in the UK and in the States, people don't have 5 strings.
They're very hard to find.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it would be amazing, You know, there are so many Americans
I
out
think it's
there who
possible.
want to do it. You think, well, then let's do it.
I think it's possible.
Let's do
Let's
it.
find a way to make this work.
Yeah, but then we would have to work together, because I do think it could possibly compromise the piece, and I wouldn't want to do that. I never really rewrite my pieces for different instruments, and I know it's not a different instrument, but it is potentially a different instrument, isn't it?
It is a slightly different instrument.
Yeah.
Very similar, though.
Let's do that. What a great
Okay. We'll shake on
result of
that.
our talk. Cool.
Well, now that I have that promise from you,
It was a promise to try. It wasn't a promise to succeed.
fair enough. Well, thank you, Rebecca Saunders,
You're very welcome.
for joining us today, and thank you to whoever was listening to this.
Yes. Okay. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
That was Nebenstimmen, a podcast by Ensemble Modern.